a few papers, and I think that we will add more in the course of the video. It is extremely basic and important that you read literature. So I now spent 1.5 hours to show you how to get this literature. The important point is that access to almost all of the world's science is free. It doesn't matter if you are in a center which has money or does not have money. The only thing that you need is a computer and an internet connection, and you have access to all of science today. Use it.
Thầy nhấn mạnh là việc đọc bài báo khoa học là rất quan trọng đó các anh chị, và bây giờ chúng ta không phải trả tiền phí để đọc những cái đó, chúng ta chỉ có laptop và internet access để mà đọc, thì thầy khuyến khích các anh chị nên đọc các bài báo khoa học.
Your access to the literature is the same that I have, is the same that someone sitting in MIT has. Exactly the same. Now, journals, some very environmental journals like Nature Science, sometimes you have to pay to get internet access. But there are two ways to get it. First, almost all of them release the publications for free after 6 months. And second, many of them have excellent deals for developing countries. So you have access from today's information, maximum to a few months old information. Please use it, it's essential to get science done.
Chúng ta có lợi ích là ở các nước phát triển thì phải trả tiền để đọc những cái bài báo quan trọng, các tạp chí quan trọng, nhưng mà chúng ta thì có thể được tài trợ vì là nước đang phát triển, hoặc là sau 6 tháng thì họ sẽ đăng những cái bài báo đó.
Okay, now we can start. We're going to talk during this lecture about the complexity of soil, and we're going to link that to microbial activity. So we're going to get into the more details of the topic of the course. So, okay, this one is not working. Yes, on. This one first. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about soil heterogeneity, ecosystem connectivity, definitions, and microbial activity. So first of all, soils are extremely important, as we know. The German science a few years ago called it the final frontier, and a few years later, they also ran a special issue on food security. And as we understand, both issues, both subjects are intimately linked. So, first of all, why soils? First, soils are principal agricultural resource. It's the growth medium of almost all plants. It's the largest reservoir of biodiversity, and it's the basis of terrestrial life.
Đất là cái nguồn tài nguyên chính cho nông nghiệp và là cái môi trường để trồng tất cả các loại cây cối, là kho dự trữ lớn nhất về đa dạng sinh học và là cơ sở của cuộc sống ở trên mặt đất.
Okay, so when we look at planet Earth, 70% is water, so 30% is land mass, of these, only a portion can be used in agriculture, but what we're looking at actually is this very, very thin part here that supports the lithosphere and supports the land. And this is the basis for, this is where the soils are. The soils are finally the product of all the interactions that occur at the geological level. Okay? So soil is very complex. It's very complex because it contains living organisms, it contains minerals, it contains organic matter, it contains inorganic matter, and all of them make up the soil. Okay? Now these different aspects that I just mentioned are covered by very different but complementary fields of science: ecology, soil science, agronomy, microbiology, all these forming also soil microbiology. The story or the history of soil is also very complex because the outcome, the soils that we see today everywhere, is the result of many parameters working together. So soil formation depends on the topography of the place, the birth material, the type of rock that you have, the climate that is working on this, the life form that covers, that develop on that particular place, and today, of course, human use. And this is, like you would say, a multi-parameter, a space, which is complex also in the sense that it changes with time. So it's not static, it's a dynamic process.
Cấu tạo của đất rất là phức tạp, nó là một cái quá trình chuyển đổi liên tục theo thời gian và dựa trên khí hậu, dựa trên đá mẹ, dựa trên bề mặt địa hình, dựa trên sự sử dụng đất của con người và các dạng sống ở trên mặt đất.
Okay, this brings up the fact that soils are very diverse. You have a diversity of soils. This can be called, in fact, environmentally, as one of the more complex environmental puzzles. Soils are heterogeneous at all scales, as you can see. They're made of multiple, extremely variable biotic and abiotic components. The biotic components of soil can be extremely diverse and fluctuating, so changing in time. And the structure and function of the biotic components are influenced by external, like weather conditions, as well as by internal interaction between the constituents of the soil forces.
Đất là không đồng nhất ở nhiều mức độ và nó là được tạo thành bởi những cái vô sinh và các thành phần vô sinh và hữu sinh. Các thành phần vô sinh thì rất là đa dạng và dao động nhiều cấu trúc và chức năng của các thành phần hữu sinh này thì đều ảnh hưởng bởi các tác động ở bên ngoài và tác động bên trong.
Okay, so when we look at this is a complex system, as I mentioned. When we look at this complexity, this is just an example of a soil map from somewhere. And what you see here, each color is a different soil type. Now pay attention, you have quite a number of colors in this map, but pay attention to the scale. This is only 4 kilometers. So on a small surface, a small area, you may have a large complexity, a large diversity of soils.
Cái bản đồ này ở trong một cái khoảng đất rất là nhỏ là 4 km mà cho thấy rất là nhiều loại đất khác nhau, rất là phức tạp và rất là đa dạng.
So this is quite heterogeneous. But the thing is that when you look at this scale, or if you go to another scale, it doesn't become more simple. If you see the complexities at all scales, so when we zoom from this kilometer scale to centimeters or millimeter scales, or 100 micrometers here, you see that it's still very heterogeneous and very complex. Here you have a root, you have fungi, you have a mite, you have a nematode, you have some water, some air, bacteria, and different methods, all of them together, they're dispersed in a totally heterogeneous way.
Khi mà nhìn ở một cái quy mô như vậy thì nó vẫn là có một tính chất không đồng nhất.
And okay. And it doesn't get better when you go even further down the scale. So this is even a closer look. It's similar. It's heterogeneous, just more heterogeneity at the smaller scale. All right. Now, this was when you look physically at what's going on. Now let's have another look at how soil is constituted. This would be like a small clump, a small aggregate of soil. This you see millimeters, so a few millimeters here, from 0 another few millimeters here. Look at this clump of soil, it looks like a topographic map, but it's actually an oxygen map. Outside, it could be totally oxidized, but as you go inside the clump, oxygen could go down, and the center could be totally reduced. So the outside will be oxidized, and the center will be reduced.
Ở ngoài thì bị oxy hóa, ở trong thì sẽ giảm.
Do you know how this can happen? What could be the reason? If you have a small clump of soil, the outside could be oxidized, like the air, but inside you wouldn't have any oxygen. What can be the reason for that? The presence of the microorganisms, that would be one of the reasons. That would be, but the very first reason would be that here it would be drier, and here would be full with water. It would be full with water, the microbes would respire the oxygen would go down. This would mean that this is reduced, and this is oxidized. Now, when you look at this, you ask a question. We are scientists. If you're a scientist, you look at phenomena. When you look at the phenomenon, you try to quantify it. You sample, you analyze, you bring data, and you look at the results and you try to make sense of it. Now, the first question you will ask when you take a clump of soil, what is representative? What is a sample? If everything is so changing so fast in time and in space, what I'm doing here, is it the same here and here?
Câu hỏi của nhà khoa học khi lấy mẫu đất là cái gì là cái đại diện, bởi vì cái sự thay đổi của nó quá nhanh, quá lớn, cho nên chúng ta không biết được cái gì đại diện đất tính không đồng nhất.
Okay. Now, when you take into consideration, and we will see that during the course, that in this very small clump of soil, you may have thousands of different types of bacteria. What sense can you make out of it? Or how do you make sense out of it?
Ở trong một đất thì có tới cả ngàn vi khuẩn, các loại vi khuẩn khác nhau.
So to make sense out of it, you need very powerful tools for the analysis and very powerful tool for understanding the data that you have, like multivariate analysis, statistical tools. So I will talk about it during the course. I will talk mainly about that part, the biological part, as mentioned by Zoran earlier, and he will talk about the bioinformatics.
Chúng ta cần những một bộ thống kê rất mạnh mẽ để phân tích các đa biến số.
So, if we summarize what we've seen here in a few minutes, the soil diversity is composed of spatial diversity, so changes in space at all different scales, from large scale to small scale, and temporal heterogeneity, because this can change very rapidly.
Cái sự đa dạng
And when we try to look at what affects these different types of diversity, we see that the spatial diversity and the spatial heterogeneity are brought about by the parent rock, the climate, the topography, the plant cover, where the temporal heterogeneity and some of the spatial heterogeneity can be really affected by management, like agriculture, human use, etc., the weather, and stochastic events. These are things that can change very rapidly, for instance, the passage of a boot, or the wetting and the drying, but the soil types is things that change much more slowly.
Các yếu tố ở bên phải là các yếu tố ảnh hưởng đến cái sự đa dạng của bên trái.
Another parameter that affects this temporal heterogeneity, and you mentioned earlier the micro, is the reaction, the combination of the environment with the organisms through the metabolism and mineral weathering in a certain sense. So metabolism, so the organic, or the biological part of soil affects very strongly temporal heterogeneity. Things can change rapidly because of metabolism. Now, I'm going to give you an example that you will think, what is the connection? Why does it speak about it? But I want to make a point very clear about the connection of systems.
Thầy sẽ cho một ví dụ là tại sao lại có một cái sự liên kết như vậy.
And that's exactly why I choose an example which is a bit bizarre. So, all of these heterogeneity and changes at different scales are also part of complex interactions. They interact one with the other. We're going to see an example linking solvent, wine, and soils. So, what we're seeing here is a link between the life cycle of salmon, which is a fish, nutrient uptake and transport, nutrient recycling and natural sources in agricultural and natural plant systems.
Một cái sự liên kết giữa vòng đời của cá hồi, cái nguồn dinh dưỡng và sự di chuyển, sự vòng đời của dinh dưỡng, các nguồn đi trong nông nghiệp và hệ thống cây.
So, let's first of all, very rapidly have a quick look at the life cycle of salmon. The salmon is a fish that I don't think that you have in Vietnam, because it's a fish that grows in cold climates. So in Scotland, in Canada, in Norway, they have Scotland, they have salmon. The salmon breeds in the river, upstream in the river. The alevins, the fry, the small fish, they grow in the river, and then they develop, and as they develop, they swim downstream to the sea. They go to the sea and they mature in the sea, so they become adults in the sea.
Chúng ta sẽ còn nhìn cái vòng đời của các hồ thì cá sống ở những cái vùng mà có khí hậu lạnh như Bắc. Trứng sẽ tạo ra cá bột và cá bột nở ra và di chuyển xuống sông và đi ra biển.
They can spend years, 5, 6, 7 years, swimming in the ocean, thousands of kilometers away from where they were born, but when time comes, they swim back to the same river. They find it back. To the same river, they swim upstream, they mate, they deposit the eggs, and they die.
Sau nhiều năm sống ở biển thì cá trưởng thành, nhưng mà cá bơi ngược dòng quay trở về cái sâu nên hồi nhỏ xong nó mới nở.
And this is what is interesting for us now, is when they die. Not for them maybe, but for us. So when they die, this comes in a short season, and one can see something like this. So you would have a rather large number of dead fish in a small, relatively small area. Now what happens to the bodies of these species? they decompose. And the nutrients from the fish serve to are recycled in the area of the river.
Sau khi cá hồi để trứng thì nó chết và cái cơ thể phân hủy thì sẽ giúp cho sự tạo ra những chất dinh dưỡng cho những vùng xung quanh sông.
This brings about increased growth to the plants in the area of the river, and this is the cycle. Now, as you can see in the previous slide here, there's increased growth in the area of the river. This makes sense. This is, almost trivial.
Và hơn 90% của cái phân phối của cơ thể phân hủy của cá hồi thì chuyển qua đất và có các sinh vật thú ăn thịt hoặc là động vật ăn xác chết.
But what is less trivial, what is less obvious, is that 90% of the biomass of the dead salmon actually do not stay. They are moved into the land. They are moved into the land by wildlife such as these bears, these predators, these scavengers. So they take the dead salmon and they eat it, and of course they bring the nutrients back to the land.
Các động vật ăn thịt trong mảnh lưới ví dụ như là gấu hoặc là linh cẩu hoặc là chuột kênh cũng sử dụng cái xác.
So what you have here, finally, is that you have, when you look at it, these salmons, where did they grow? They grow in the water, in the ocean. So the nutrients that they bring back to the land, and I don't remember here if I have the example of the agricultural fields, but what they bring nutrients from the ocean back to the land.
Khi mà cá hồi chuyển ngược dòng trở lại thì đã đem những cái dinh dưỡng từ đại dương tới đất.
And actually, what you're seeing here is oceanic fertilization of land through this process. It's a small process, but it's an interesting
một loại phân bón có nguồn gốc từ đại dương.
Okay? Now, this has been shown to play in some grape raising areas in California to play an important role, so that these soils bring nutrients to the fields, in agricultural fields as well as in forests. So it's not something which is globally important, but globally important it is in some places. Now, how do you know? Yeah, you see that. You see the soils are dying. You see that nutrients may be transported. How do you prove it? You're a scientist. You have to prove it. How do you know that the nutrients that come from that actually the nutrients that are brought about came from the sea?
Làm sao chúng ta có thể biết được cái đó là các cái dinh dưỡng được mang đến từ đại dương? Chúng ta là những nhà khoa học nên phải tìm những cái biện pháp để chứng minh. Thì đây là một phương pháp.
So this is just an example of a technology, just as an example of modern technologies that enable you to trace where nutrients come from. This is stable isotopes. I don't know how many of you are familiar. Maybe you are, maybe you are not, maybe some are. Stable isotopes. So stable, you all know that atoms come in different flavors. Some are different flavors, meaning that the size of their nucleus. For instance, you have hydrogen here, which has one electron and one proton, and you have deuterium, which has one electron, one proton, and one neutron. So this is a stable isotope of hydrogen. It does not decompose into radioactive. It doesn't decompose by radioactivity. It's stable.
Đây là trọng vị bền vững của hydrogen.
Yeah. Okay. So you can trace the origin of atoms from the ratio of stable isotopes in the compounds you're looking at.
Chúng ta có thể tra được dấu vết của cái đồng vị đó bằng cái tỷ lệ của các đồng vị bền vững.
For instance, if you're looking at stable isotopes of nitrogen, which is N15. N15 is the stable isotope of nitrogen, which is N14. the ratio of N15 to N14 in proteins is different in marine life than it is in terrestrial life.
Ví dụ như là cái đồng vị bền vững của nitơ 15, cái tỷ lệ của đồng vị nitơ 15 trên nitơ 14 thì cao hơn ở trong nước biển hơn là ở trong nước.
This way, by doing this kind of analysis, it can be proven that part of the fertilization that is coming to these fields I mentioned originate from the sea and not from the land.
Phương pháp này mà chúng ta có thể chứng minh được cái.
And here you have, if you want to look later on, you have a simple equation of how to calculate. Okay? So, nitrogen originating from solvent digested and excreted by animals is further recycled to become available to plants.
Nitơ bắt đầu từ cá hồi đã được tiêu hóa và được thải ra bởi động vật thì được tái sinh trở thành hữu ích cho cây cối.
So, how does it come about? This nitrogen that is in the form of proteins mainly and nucleic acid in solvent has to become available back to plants. This is done by the nitrogen cycle, which is a bacterial-driven central ecological process that we're going to talk about later on in one of the classes.
Chương trình nitơ này là một cái chương trình chính của cái quá trình sinh thái học và được thực hiện bởi vi khuẩn.
This process, like many processes involving microorganisms, are directly linked to the activity of the microbes, what is called microbial activity. So nutrient cycling, including nitrogen cycling, is directly related to microbial activity.
Sự trao đổi chất dinh dưỡng giống như là một cái vòng đời của nitơ thì liên quan trực tiếp đến hoạt động của vi sinh.
Okay? To summarize this part, and it's very important to keep that in mind when you're looking at systems, complex systems. For instance, an agricultural field is a complex system, is that ecosystems do not function in isolation. They are interconnected. So if you want to understand properly or more efficiently what you're looking at, you have to take into account that what you're looking at is not a disconnected phenomenon, it's part of interactions.
Hệ sinh thái thì không hoạt động cô lập mà nó luôn luôn có liên kết với các yếu tố khác.
Okay? Now let's go back to soils. This is very basic. Again, I hope that it's okay. That some of you that it's not too redundant. Soil is based on non-organic and biotic components. So, So soil is composed of organic and inorganic components, and what we're looking at here is the non-organic or the abiotic components.
Chúng ta nhìn về thành phần vô cơ và vô sinh của nó.
So there are 5 basic components: the air, the gaseous phase, which different gases, the water. The water and the air actually fill up the pores of the soil, and this changes very rapidly upon wetting and drying. The mineral particles, the sand, the silt, and the clay. The organic matter, which is decaying dead material, and of course the living cells, the macroorganisms, and the microorganisms as well.
Không khí, nước, các phần khoáng chất, các chất hữu cơ và các tế bào sống.
Soils are composed of different horizons. So this is a fully developed soil. So what we saw in the previous slide changes very much depending upon if you're looking here at the top soil.